There's so much in the news these days. Charlie Kirk, our government buying a stake in Intel, social media, high tech, throttling people whose speech they don't like. Jeff Dornik is an author and an entrepreneur. He's written several books. Actually, he's got Church and State, Social Injustice, and his new book, Following the Leader. Jeff, welcome to The Truth.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Been looking forward to chatting with you.
And you've got your own podcast called The Jeff Dornik Show. And you've got your own social media site called Pickax. That's an unusual name.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And I always say too, it's like between all the different millions of things that I do, and then any free time that I do have, I'm chasing a 3-year-old around the house, so it's it makes life fun. But yeah, like with Pickaxe specifically, like the whole idea was having a constitutionally protected free speech platform, which is very rare, if at all, out there. But also helping creators and show hosts and podcasters and bloggers and everybody to actually have more direct access to their audience, because that's something that everybody is struggling with, whether you're in politics or you're in other industries as well. Is people are struggling because the algorithms have kind of taken over and they manipulate the feed to where it really doesn't matter what kind of audience you've built anymore. It matters about whether the content that you're putting out there, the algorithms actually want to promote. And so it's a very weird scenario out there. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up building, Pickaxe, is to create an alternative that actually put our users and our creators first, which is, again, very unusual in the social media space.
Now, how did you come up with the name? That's kind of out of left field, it seems.
Yeah, so I didn't want something too on the nose, and because I wanted something that it meant something, it represented something, and also I wanted something that we could turn into a verb, and so we ended up throwing ideas around, and we came up with this idea of Pickaxe. Because free speech is messy. It emotes more manual labor as opposed to the typical high tech, kind of sci-fi type of a name. But it's like we're picking away at the power and control that big tech and these big companies have over us. But then also on top of that, if you're on the platform, if you like a post, you pick it. If you don't, you axe it. So we were able to kind of turn it into a verb from that standpoint and play with that. But I think, to me, the really big driver for this is just the idea that if you want free speech, we have to be, constantly working at it. We have to be okay with things getting messy, and we get dirty, and we're taking control of our own, basically our own content, our own voices, and actually working to break away from the hold that big tech and these big corporations have over us. And so that was really, all that went into, picking the name Pickaxe.
When John Kennedy was assassinated, and I was just a little boy, but my entire life I've carried those memories with me. I was home from school and I watched everything unfold on our family TV, and it left an indelible impression on me. And as a political science major in college, I've always just sort of internalized that he, made the wrong people mad, that he was a threat to the military industrial complex. Charlie Kirk's assassination, however, seems to me to strike a blow directly, and I don't mean this metaphorically, but at the heart of free speech. And that seems to me to be one of the worst things that I can remember in my life, frankly, that you have a 31-year-old living in a free country with the ability to select our leaders, playing within the bounds, playing by the rules, and someone just decides they don't like what he says. I mean, my wife, who's apolitical, she's a wonderful person, by the way, but politics is not her thing. She said, well, that's obviously the Democrats, because he was having too much success in recruiting young voters to vote conservative and Republican. Do you have any thoughts on this horrible tragedy, Jeff?
Yeah, it's one of those things where when you look at Charlie Kirk, as so many people have pointed out, and your wife pointed out as well, is that he's very effective at what he does. And I sent out a Substack yesterday, kind of talking about this. But when you look at Charlie Kirk, he said repeatedly that he's like, if we actually want to save this country, we have to have conversation, we have to have disagreement, and we have to be civil about it. We have to listen to the other side, we have to discuss, we have to debate, because as soon as both sides stop talking, that's when violence happens, that's when civil war happens. And he's like, I'm trying to avoid that by doing this. So you've literally got a guy who believed in free speech, in the free exchange of ideas, in debating, people that he disagreed with, and he would go into the lion's den and be willing to have difficult conversations
Oh,
with people
I
who
think he relished it. I think it was to some extent a sport for him. And I knew Charlie Kirk. I knew him reasonably well. I've spent a lot of time with him. I spent over an hour with him just a few months ago, one on one with a friend of mine, Charlie was soliciting for donations, and we spent a very enjoyable hour and a half talking to him. And I suggested to him then that I thought he would be a great vice presidential candidate, and he said, "Well, I'm too young. I can't do that for another 4 years." But he didn't say that he wouldn't. I really felt he was destined to become a serious candidate for president of the United States. But in addition to losing, just a really good guy. I mean, he didn't go to college, yet he was one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I asked him, I said, "Charlie, how did you acquire all your knowledge?" He said, "I'm self-taught." He said, I just incessantly am reading. And my biggest concern is that the impact that it will have to chill free speech in this country.
Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely a very big concern, and it's even concerning because there's even some Republican, I forget if it was a senator or a congressman that was actually wanting to ban people who off of social media platforms that were celebrating the assassination of Charlie. And you're like, okay, I get the sentiment of that, but at the same time, if we're truly a free speech platform, as long as people are reacting to that, and this is where I go back to when I was talking about the name of Pickaxe. It's like free speech is messy, free speech is dirty, free speech allows for completely offensive, insane things, and we have to defend that. And I think that Charlie Kirk was one of those guys. He truly believed in the First Amendment to its nth degree. The thing especially with this assassination that I think is so chilling to me is how it shows how powerful the mainstream media is and how powerful the Democrat Party is. Because when you think about it, they've been able to brainwash and manipulate their base to actually believe that Donald Trump is the equivalent of Adolf Hitler, and anybody who's associated with him is basically the equivalent of a Nazi. So when you actually think about it from that perspective, you're like, you get how they radicalize people in order to try to assassinate somebody as loving and caring and as Christian and biblical and nice and kind as Charlie Kirk, because they've literally brainwashed their base to believe Trump's Hitler and Charlie Kirk is a Nazi simply by being associated to Donald Trump. And this is where we need to start figuring out, how do we break down the barriers? How do we have conversations with people that actually start rationally thinking about things and getting a different opinion? Because a lot of people that I talk to out here in communist California, they never hear a conservative perspective. They never talk to a conservative or a Christian or hear an opposing point of view. All they're doing is being inundated with Democrat leftist talking points from the mainstream media and their favorite Democrat politicians, and they're never hearing the other side. And that's where Charlie Kirk was so effective. He would go into the lion's den and he would actually bring an opposing perspective and be willing to debate these people, and then actually allow them to have to encounter and rationalize against a conservative perspective. And so we've got to figure out, how can we continue that mission that Charlie Kirk was doing as an entire movement and break down those barriers and really reach out to the everyday people that find themselves brainwashed by the Democrat Party.
The thing that these liberal Democrats really, in the aftermath of Charlie's assassination, some of them, including AOC, said, well, when you spew hate, you risk consequences like what occurred to Charlie Kirk. I find that statement contemptible. I find Matthew Dowd contemptible, who was blaming Charlie Kirk for his own death, in effect, and he got fired from MSNBC. Should he have gotten fired because he made statements that were worthy of contempt?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think anybody who, especially if your job is in the public light and you're a commentator, or you're a politician or whatever it is, I feel like if you're going down that route to where you are commending, or basically blaming the victim of a murder or an assassination, yeah, you should probably be fired. And I think that, because again, you're forward facing to the audience, and you're supposed to be, sharing your opinion on things. Like, yeah, and I think that this is again where we have to differentiate when you're talking about the First Amendment. The First Amendment is specifically restricting the government from, restricting your speech. But if you're a private entity or private company, you have every right to, fire somebody for saying something contemptible. That's completely within the bounds of your authority as a company. And I think that it's wise to do that, because we should not, as a society, tolerate that kind of celebration when it comes to our culture, our society. Like, we need to value human life. But I think also the response that we've seen from the left to Charlie Kirk's assassination also goes to show how little they actually view life. And that's the really interesting thing. Obviously, we all understand that when it comes to things like abortion, but when it comes to actual full grown human life, if you're not in their club, they don't value your life at all. They could care less. In fact, they actually rejoice when you are caused harm, when you're killed, even when you're assassinated like Charlie Kirk. They don't value life, and a lot of it's because they don't believe in God. They don't believe in our creator. They
Yeah.
don't believe in the one who gives us those inalienable rights that cannot be taken away by the government. So if you don't believe in God, you don't believe in rights, because guess what? If God doesn't exist, then there is no rights giver. But then on top of that, you don't have any intrinsic value as a human being, because they don't believe that you're created in the image of God. That was the beauty of what Charlie Kirk always talked about, is he always brought God and his faith and his Christian faith back into it. And it's so important, because if you're going to value human life, you have to understand why we value human life. And you have value just by being alive, because you're created in the image of God. The left doesn't believe that, because they don't believe in God.
It's incredulous to me that they would call Charlie Kirk's speech hate speech. When I heard Charlie Kirk talk, and I've heard him a lot, I mean a whole lot, and I had him on this radio show. We had a nice half-hour conversation and interview, and when I heard him talk about free speech, the Constitution, respecting the flag, not giving way to hate, and not giving way to these labels that they want to put on people that say things that they disagree with. And I'm wondering, what component of that is hateful? To love our flag, to love our country, to love law and order, to love God, to love life, to value the sanctity of life. Tell me, where is the hate?
Yeah. Well, but that's the problem, is that they never actually define hate or hate speech.
They don't define anything that they say.
That's true.
They say you're sexist, you're misogynist, you're homophobic. All these labels, they accuse people of being things, but they never say you're ist because you said this. It's just always vague. And I'm on this one chat thread on Facebook, and I don't know what you call it. I guess it's not a chat thread, but it's a place where people post on this one individual's page. And he is a retired, esteemed, former national media, uh, a journalist and an executive at the highest level in our country. And they just go around bragging about each other and saying what wonderful people they are. Like that gal on CNN that Trump hates. I don't know that he hates her. He really doesn't like her, though. Neither do I. What's her name? Anthony, you got to start watching the news more. Caitlin Collins, is that her name?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Is that the reporter on CNN that is always going? And they say, oh, what a wonderful person she is. What an outstanding journalist she is. How smart she is. But they never give you the why. I mean, why do you think she's smart? Why do you think she's so brilliant? Because she's just constantly going at Trump night and day, relentlessly. And 90% of the stuff that she says is just not true.
Yeah.
And it just gets under my skin so bad, I don't know what to do. But I don't know, Jeff, whether firing Matthew Dowd was the right thing to do or not. I mean, I celebrated it. I was so excited and so happy. And, and effectively, he has been canceled. Is it right when we do it? I know it's wrong when they do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did it with justification, and we didn't do it on the basis of rumor. How many men's lives and their marriages and their families were completely shattered and broken apart because they were accused of sexual abuse or overreaching. And I wonder how many of those people were innocent and were not culpable even a little bit.
Right.
Because back in the Me Too movement, all you had to do is just say it. You just had to say, he hit on me. He took advantage of me. He was inappropriate with me. You didn't have to define it. You just say, hey, Jeff's inappropriate to me. X, you're done. Fired. Your career is over. Your marriage is over. Your life is effectively over. So I don't know. I'm really struggling with this. I can tell you that this Charlie Kirk thing has hit me, and it's hit me hard. I mean, I don't mean to give the impression that Charlie and I were best friends or on speed dial. I did have his cell phone number and his email, and we communicated sparingly, usually with a purpose. But that aside, it was just that this was a 31-year-old brilliant person who was standing up for his convictions and what he believed in. And by the way, there is a dramatic and discernible trend by young people to come back to the church and to embrace Christianity and Christian values and conservative values.
And I would largely say that Charlie Kirk had a huge part of that, especially for young men coming back to the faith. And I think it's when we're talking about kind of going back to what you're talking about with the whole cancel culture thing, it's something that I totally agree with you, especially when it came to the Me Too stuff and all of that. I think that the difference here, as far as I know, is like MSNBC fired that guy almost immediately,
almost on the spot. That wasn't that you make a very valuable point. It wasn't a conservative reaction to conservative pressure.
Right.
It was just a fundamental, boy, that is flat out wrong. Goodbye, you're done.
Right. It's like he crossed a line, and like, look, we can't go that far. And I think I would totally disagree and oppose, let's say, if a social media platform came in and kicked him off the platform for saying that, because that's not technically not illegal speech, but it's reprehensible And that's where it's like, as MSNBC, you don't want that representing you as a company. So I get why they would why they would fire him. The problem with like Me Too was that it was all based on accusations, unverified. Okay, you even have an accusation against you, we're done, we can no longer work with you. That level of cancel culture was nuts and insane. But I think to kind of you just bring it back to Charlie. I think it's important. I think for us all to look at what he did and how he did it, because and also look at why and how he was so effective. He was effective because he was going into the lion's den, but he wasn't hostile. He wasn't hostile to people that disagreed with him. He showed people respect. I think, I've seen a lot of different people, they go onto college campuses and they almost kind of like look down their nose at a lot of these, leftists that come up and talk to them. And it's always about, we're going to destroy the left and they own the libs. With him, it was like an actual legitimate, like, I want to hear your perspective. I want to hear you try to change my mind. I'm going to give you my best argument, and let's have a civil conversation and civil dialogue. And I think that he was so successful. And I've talked to several different college age kids who changed their minds specifically because of Charlie Kirk and how effective and rational and logical he is. And when you actually sit down and you think about it, it's like he showed respect to people even that he vehemently disagreed with. That's something that I think that we need to learn. Like, I think we can show utter contempt for the elites, the politicians, the mainstream media, because they're disgusting and vile and corrupt. But to the everyday people that find themselves on the other side of the aisle or that disagree with us, I think we need to show love and grace and show compassion and show respect to people, because they do have value. They are human beings, and that's what Charlie Kirk, I think emoted. His faith lived through that in the way that he talked and he interacted with people that he disagreed with. And I think that that's honestly why he was so much more effective than pretty much anybody else in the conservative movement.
So we've just found out that the assassin uh, is a guy named Tyler Robinson. Now, I've got three sons. I love them so much. I'm so very proud of them. Can you imagine if you were watching television and you saw your son in black uniform and you recognized him as the assassin of Charlie Kirk, and you picked up the phone and called the FBI? That's what Tyler Robinson's father did. That must have been the most difficult call that he ever made. And he was absolutely so courageous and correct to make the call. Tyler Robinson, 22 years old. That's just breaking. As we've been doing this interview, we know nothing about him. Um, but it appears that he's been captured alive, which is a first. And maybe we'll be able to get to the bottom of whether he acted alone through some derangement, or whether he was part of a cult, or whether he was somehow part of something larger. I really haven't heard even the conspiratorialists really saying that Charlie was a victim of a organized or well planned plot from a group of people. Hopefully we will learn the truth and learn the details. Do you have any supposition on your own? I mean, Anthony over here is a marksman. He collects guns. He's kind of, I don't know, he's kind of out there. But he said that shot that this guy took was not just a throwdown. That it required skill and some degree of precision. Um, any hunches? What's up here?
Yeah, so I think with this, I was just talking with a really good friend of mine who's also in the media and stuff, and we were talking about this very thing. And because when you actually look at the angle from the FBI posted a photo of where he took the shot from, looking towards where Charlie Kirk was sitting, and like there you see he's sitting there, and then you've got a building that's coming out that's almost in between, not quite, but slightly off to the right, where the corner of the building it would be blocking a huge percentage of the crowd that's right there. And so even if he was off just slightly to the right, he would have hit the side of the building. And so to me, The hard thing with this, and the FBI kind of talked about this a little bit. I think it was either this morning or late last night, where they do know that he was in communication with somebody else on Discord, and that he was coordinating with them for dropping off the gun, picking it up. I've been hearing reports that that he actually got the engravings with the casings. It was already on there, so there's definitely potential that he was working or coordinating with somebody else. I know John Solomon and some other people as well have been saying that there's chatter within the intelligence agencies, and I think Sean Hannity confirmed it last night that he was told by somebody in an intelligence agency that there may have been like a foreign agency or foreign government or something like that was somehow involved. Maybe it's through that Discord chat. I have no idea. So we're gonna hopefully get down to the bottom of this at some point very, very soon. But I think that we still need to be asking a lot of questions, just because we can't let what happened to Donald Trump's attempted assassination happen again, because what ended up, they just kept kicking the can down the road, and then eventually people kind of moved on, and we still don't really have answers to that. You go back to pretty much all these, look at all the different assassinations that have happened. There's discrepancies in a lot of them, and I feel like we rarely, if ever, get answers. And the question is why? I don't know, but that's why I think we need to continually put the pressure on, because this one was different. Charlie Kirk was different than a lot of the other assassinations and assassination attempts that we've seen. With Trump, you get the Trump derangement. People are insane. They're crazy. He's running for president. He's going to become president of the United States and actually have decision-making power. And if you truly think that he's Adolf Hitler, I get how somebody who's brainwashed and pushed with propaganda would feel like, okay, this is the moral decision to do this. You look at things like that. You're like, okay, you get that. Charlie Kirk was the nicest person you would ever meet. Charlie Kirk was not a politician. He was an everyday conservative voice. He was talking to people. He was anti-violence because he was trying to have conversations to avoid the violence. I
Yeah.
can't think of another assassination to me that was this shocking of somebody who wasn't a politician in America since like MLK Jr. Like, when you actually think about it, they were just like they were a leader of a movement of, that were both nonviolent, and they were assassinated for that. Like, to me, that's how shocking this is. He was not a president. He was not a politician. He was not somebody who had like decision-making power, and he was still taken out in this fashion.
Husband, father, patriot, 31, athlete. I mean, it's just shocking that we could get to this place. And I really am worried about our future as a country, not so much as a country, but as a democratically governed country. I also think Charlie had beliefs or suspicions that he was going to be assassinated. Evidently, he told a number of people that he felt that he was perhaps going to be assassinated, and I guess he had been critical of Israel of late, and was vocal about his concerns about Israel and their treatment of the people in Palestine. Another very difficult issue. I've repeatedly said on this station in this broadcast that I am sympathetic for people who don't have shelter, clothing, food, any form of security, any reason for optimism about their life. But unfortunately, Palestinians have thrown down with Hamas that killed 200 people at a pop festival and have brutally, savagely killed women, pregnant women, and young children. I mean, how can you have any compassion? How can you have any sympathy for people that behave in that fashion and commit these sorts of atrocities? And I mean, I think the enemy is not the Palestinians. The enemy is Hamas. And I don't have a solution for dealing with Hamas other than complete annihilation. And if someone has a better strategy, please let me know. You can email me, johngordontruth@gmail.com. I'd like to hear from you. I've searched my brain, I've searched my soul, I've searched social media and the news media. I haven't read where anyone is offering a solution to how you deal with savage terrorists.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, and the thing for me is I look at it and I see some valid points, I think, on both sides of the argument. I get the side, and this is where I think a lot of people have gone into the anti-Israel crowd. I get the side of, like, you don't like seeing non-military people getting killed. You don't like seeing civilians, women and children, getting killed. On the flip side, I've also talked to military guys that have been active duty in Afghanistan and in the Middle East, and they've told me specifically that he's like, these kids are brainwashed, where the entire population is basically taught that if you kill an infidel, or you kill an American, or whatever it is, then that's a good thing. And also, I've spoken to military guys that have said that, like, look, we can't physically go into every single house and school and hospital and pick out the difference between a civilian and one of their military people, because it's not like they're dressed in a uniform. They don't have like a football jersey on that says, "Hi, I'm a Hamas terrorist." They blend in with their surroundings, and that's very intentional. So they're like, it's not feasible to say we're going to go knock on doors and ask, "Hey, is there a Hamas terrorist in here?" and we're going to arrest you. That's not how it works when they're literally hiding. So I get both sides of the argument, and I think that that's where it's like we need more conversation about this, and more discussion and understanding of the other side. And that's again, to commend Charlie on the way he was handling. I think that he actually handled, even when he brought up his concerns with Israel and certain aspects of it, he still did so with respect and with grace. It wasn't a lot of this anti-Semitic BS that you see on a lot of these other influencers. It was coming from a level of compassion and logic and all of that, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. But to me, again, he showed us how we should handle ourselves in a lot of these situations, and I think he was a perfect example for us.
Well, I think that he was joined by Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson as well, who have expressed concerns, and now they are just knee jerkly and reflexively categorized as people who hate Jews. And I just don't think that's a fair representation at all. But evidently, Charlie thought that he was a marked man and was worried about being assassinated. He had on a bulletproof vest. Supposedly, the bullet struck the bulletproof vest and ricocheted into his neck and just died so tragically, horrifically, unnecessarily. And anyway, it's just a very sad thing, very sad occurrence for him, his family, and our country. So let's switch gears and talk about something that's a little less depressing, and that is the United States government is invested in Intel. And in exchange for our investment, Donald Trump extracted a 10% ownership of Intel. You're not too keen on that, from what I gather.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the federal government having a financial stake in a private corporation. I believe in the separation of the state with business, because for a variety of reasons. One is that our government's supposed to be neutral when it comes to things, especially when our own government is passing legislation that could potentially benefit or cause harm to a company. Also, when you're talking about the Justice Department, are they going to do investigations? If the federal government has a financial interest in a corporation, are you really going to send the Justice Department to go investigate something that they may or may not be doing? There's a whole variety of issues here where there's a conflict of interest when you begin to have a financial stake, and you begin to pick winners and losers. I think the other component of this is that this again, this is my concern, is that the federal government is already way too big, and I think one of the things that RFK Jr. has really showed us with HHS and all those departments is just how corrupt these big corporations are, with our own government and how they use the regulating agencies to their benefit, to let everybody, make sure that everybody feels like, oh, it's totally safe to get this vaccine, it's totally safe to take this pharmaceutical drug, when in reality it's causing disease, disability, and death. So when you're looking at it from this perspective now, and it's like, okay, so now we have a 10% stake in Intel. What does that say to, let's say, Intel's competition?
Yeah.
Is that fair to their competition, where it's like, okay, now we're picking them to actually be basically a vested interest? How does that impact, if Intel's going up for a government contract to provide their chips with for our intelligence agencies or military or AI or whatever it is? Do they automatically have a leg up because there's a 10% stake from our government? I don't like this blending together between the private and the public world. And we saw kind of the first steps of this with President Trump during COVID, where we had all these public-private partnerships with big pharma. But now this is a public-private partnership where now there's a vested interest. And and a lot of people have said to me, like, well, it's only 10%. It's a minority stake. They don't have voting power, all of that. Okay, that's fine. But what's to stop them from with the next company doing 15% or 30% or 50% or 60% or owning them outright? I was on with Matt Gaetz actually last week debating this, and he was actually calling for like the nationalization, or basically taking over Boeing and some of these other companies altogether, and having the government own them 100% of the time. And I'm just sitting here, I'm like, do we really want the federal government physically owning private companies? No, we need to keep that separate. We need a free economy. To me, this is one more step towards socialism, or at the very least crony capitalism. They could be hijacked by the wealthy elite that are running all these corporations and kind of screwing everybody else.
Well, I spoke out against it and made similar arguments to you. I'm really disappointed to hear that Matt Gaetz, of all people, would be supportive of it. I think Matt Gaetz is going to support anything that Trump supports, basically. And I have so much trust and faith in the president. I err on that side too. I make no apology for it, because usually he turns out to be exactly right. I think the thought is, and I heard the guys on the All In podcast speak about this, and they spent a good 20 minutes discussing it to a person. All four of them, Jason Calazone, David Sachs, David Friedberg, and then the other guy who is the smartest hen in the house. Anyway, they made the argument, well, we bailed out General Motors, we bailed out Chrysler, and we've bailed out from time to time other private entities. And what did we get back for it? We got our money back. We may have gotten even a little bit of interest. But what about being able to capture the upside that results from our investment? And why deprive the American people from that? And maybe there is a way that we can have our cake and eat it too. Maybe it could be put in some sort of a blind trust. My own personal preference, and the details have got to be worked out. Okay, it's not simple, but I would like to see the Social Security Fund be able to benefit from our investment in Intel. Now, the problem is it may turn out to be a horrible investment. If they would let you and me invest the money, Jeff, I'd feel perfectly comfortable with it. But when you get politicians in the act, and I just don't know, even Jerome Powell, somebody that I've really felt like has struggled to do a good job under a lot of very difficult circumstances. I've even lost faith and confidence in him, because I've now come to the full circle. And while I do think that he deserves credit for having managed our economy and not allowed it to devolve into a recession, that's sort of been my talk track. But now we find out now that the jobs were overstated by 1 million people. I mean, I just get so damn sick and tired of this stuff. I don't know what to do. How would Jerome Powell have reacted had he known that we were not adding 1 million jobs to our economy, and instead our job count is down 1 million jobs? Now, I think that's that more than Trump. And I wish Trump would lay off him because, you can back a guy into a corner and they don't then act rationally and they'll come out swinging instead of, meet him in the middle of the room and have a conversation. And I wouldn't go on national television and embarrass him over the cost of the construction overruns at the Federal Reserve, even though maybe he should be embarrassed. But if our goal is to look out for the American people and to do what's best for the American economy, I don't know that humiliating the chairman of the Federal Reserve, which may cause him to take a position that he otherwise may not take, isn't necessarily the right answer. Now, Trump is Trump, and he knows the art of the deal, and he is a very brass knuckles, uh, accomplished business person. So, who am I to tell Trump what to do? I just would have preferred diplomacy with Jerome Powell. Now we're at a position where we desperately need a rate cut. And I think that it should be a half a point, not a quarter of a point. And I think if Trump had maintained some sort of a relationship with him, maybe we could have gotten that. Maybe there's still hope for it. But I'm just sort of gotten off track and I'm rambling along here. Let's take it back to what about a sovereign wealth fund? What about a mechanism by which we can invest? And one way we could do it, we don't have to jump into the deep end. What about taking an Intel investment and say, okay, we're going to take 10% of Intel, but we're going to compartmentalize that and put it into the Social Security fund?
Yeah, the problem that I think we have is there's so much potential for corruption, and I think one of the things that we've seen is that the federal government is pretty much corrupt 98% of the time. So I could definitely see if we're setting we've already set this precedent. So it's not like if we set this precedent, we've already set this precedent. So what's to say that okay, let's just hypothetically say Donald Trump does everything exactly right with this investment. Okay, it's a blind trust. We're going to do this. We're going to take these precautions to make sure there's no corruption. Okay, fine. What happens if and when Gavin Newsom becomes president in 2028? Now what happens? Now you're dealing with somebody who has a record and a history of using the government in order to benefit his wealthy friends. So, now you start getting into the corruption of the federal government. We have to look beyond just President Trump. We have to look at, okay, what happens if the Democrats take over next time? What happens if the wrong person gets in office and begins to use this to their benefit? This is one of the reasons why I think it's a dangerous precedent. And to kind of, highlight this point, you go back to the founding of our country. There was only one time when the federal government, up until the early 1900s, ever had a financial stake in any private entity, and that was with the First and Second National Bank, and the federal government had 20% of that, and our founding fathers were extremely divided over this, and Thomas Jefferson completely opposed it. Madison completely opposed it. Alexander Hamilton was the main champion of, the government should have a vested interest in it. But specifically, his explanation was not that the government should have a vested interest in a private entity. It was that we need some sort of centralized, monetary system, and having the government attached to it would give it some semblance of credibility to where people would feel safe that knowing that, okay, if we get a loan out from that central bank, then okay, cool, then we're safe. We're not going to lose our money. So even there, they weren't making the perspective from a financial, like what kind of money are we going to get back from. But then what we saw over the years, it was then used for corrupt purposes, to where ultimately Andrew Jackson campaigned on this, and he actually dismantled the First and Second National Bank, and he actually shut it down to where the federal government was no longer involved in it, because he saw how corrupt it was having the federal government involved with a private entity. After Andrew Jackson, there was not a single example of the federal government ever having a financial stake in this fashion with a private entity until the early 1900s, when we started to see the federal government massively explode, get way too involved in our economy, way too involved in too many things. And then we began to see in certain strategic infrastructures where the federal government would start having a financial stake in a handful of companies. And we've seen that over the course of the 20th century. And now we're seeing it now. It's really dangerous. The vast majority of our founding fathers did not actually want this kind of a thing. They wanted the separation of the federal government from private companies, because it's like, if you want a truly capitalistic society, freedom is the biggest thing, but you can't have freedom if you're having the federal government picking and choosing winners, tipping the scales in one particular direction over another, and basically, if you're picking a winner, then you're also picking a loser. That's not the role of the federal government. The federal government needs to get out of the private economy and then allow the free markets to actually work.
Well, let's switch gears once again in the few minutes that we've got remaining and talk about the paper that you wrote that alleges that X is actually suppressing not freedom of speech, but freedom of reach by throttling posts that they don't necessarily agree with. Who's the guard? Who's keeping? Who's the gatekeeper? Who's watching over what is permissible and what isn't, and what's their criteria?
Yeah, well, so the thing is that, when Elon bought Twitter and turned it into X, he was, making this big deal about freedom of speech. He let all of us, like I was permanently suspended off of Twitter back in the Jack Dorsey days. I was able to come back on and get an X account and all that kind of stuff over Elon, which is great. But if you look at their terms of service, and the term is still in there, so you could go look it up today. There's a policy that they have which says that you have freedom of speech but not freedom of reach. And essentially that means you're allowed to say whatever you want, but that doesn't mean that they have to actually let anybody see it. And I always use this example. It's like Elon Musk goes into New York Times Square and sets up a stage with speakers and a microphone and sound system. And he's like, we're going to have a free speech event. You can get up there. You can say whatever you want to the microphone. And then you get up and you start talking, and he turns down the volume to the second to lowest setting. And you're like, dude, I thought this was free speech. He's like, it's completely free speech. You can say whatever you want into the microphone, but I never made any guarantees as to the volume. That's what's happening on X right now. And so what's happening is the algorithms have their own Overton window. And actually, if you go back and when he made the code open source for the algorithms, I think it was last year, you could actually see that if somebody was considered far left or far right, then they actually you were actually dinged because they wanted you in this centrist Overton window that was considered mainstream. And so if you were considered having a mainstream viewpoint, you would get amplified. If you were talking outside of what the vast majority of people wanted to hear or were talking about, you actually got demoted. Also, if you post an outbound link on X, you get demoted in the algorithm. So if you're trying to promote your Rumble channel or your Spotify channel or your Apple Podcast link or your own website, you actually get demoted in the algorithms to where you can't promote that kind of stuff. And so when you're actually looking at this, you're like, is this actually freedom of speech if you're not having freedom of reach? And it's like when you look at the First Amendment, we had two specific things in regards to expression that are protected in there. You had freedom of speech, which is your verbal ability to speak freely without restriction from the government. That's like you going down to your town square. You can say whatever you want, and the government's not going to restrict you. But freedom of the press wasn't just a bunch of licensed journalists that could go around and write whatever they want. No, it was your individual right to write out your grievances on a piece of paper, go down to your local printing press, print out pamphlets without restriction, and then you can go distribute them freely without the government saying you can or can't. But this kind of a policy is almost like what they're saying is like, well, yeah, you can air out your grievances, you can write it on a piece of paper, but we're only going to let you print, let's say, 10 pamphlets, and then that's it. That's limiting speech. So that's not actually protecting free speech in the way that they're portraying it. And so, it's really important that we understand that if you actually believe in truly the First Amendment and free speech, you cannot by definition have freedom of speech without freedom of reach.
Well, that's an excellent point. And I guess what makes it even more disappointing is that in this case, it's coming from X. And I thought that that's what Elon had absolutely promised not to allow to happen. It's almost like, here we go again.
Yeah, well, it's like his CEO that he hired that's no longer there. But she was she came from, I think, NBC Universal.
Mhm.
She used to work for the I think it was the World Economic Forum. So she's definitely not a conservative voice of a, or even a libertarian voice of any kind that you can possibly think of. But also you have to look at it from the perspective of, so why did he make that pitch? Why did he bring back conservatives onto the platform? Well, it's very easy to see that what he was actually doing is he wanted everybody back on the platform because he wants the data. The data is the key, and we understand this because X was actually recently sold, and a lot of people don't know this. X was actually recently sold and was actually purchased by XAI, which is his
Mm,
artificial intelligence company. So
yeah.
X is technically a subsidiary of the artificial intelligence company. Why? Because they're just collecting all of the data. They want your views. They want your opinions. They may not let people see it, but they still want it because they want to pump it into the artificial intelligence. That way they get to know you better, and they can also know how to advertise more effectively to you, how to manipulate the algorithms more effectively, how to push their narratives, how to do all that kind of stuff. And so they wanted your data, which is why they opened it up and claimed it was a free speech platform. So what they do is they just suppress you. They allow you to say whatever you want, and then they're getting their data. Data is king, and that data is what makes AI go round.
Well, thank you for the insights, Jeff. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate your coming on The Truth today. Jeff is an author. He's got 3 books: The Church and State, Social Injustice, and a brand new book that is coming out very shortly. It's now in pre-sale. You can buy it, I guess, on Amazon, Jeff, Following the Leader.
Yep. Yeah. Best place to get it is actually on my website, jeffdornik.com. But yeah, Following the Leader. I'm in the final phases of getting that thing written, and it's all about just what's your getting you to figure out what's your worldview, and not just what do you believe, but why do you believe it? Are you just repeating talking points of what somebody else told you, or do you actually know that what you believe is true? And so we're going to get down to the heart of the matter on that one.
Well, thank you again. Jeff also has his own social media app called Pickax. You throttle people there?
We definitely do not throttle people there. Actually, we
Even
don't.
left lunatics.
Yeah, we don't use any algorithms in the news feed. And the really cool thing is, like, you're free as long as it's legal. You can say it. We're actually helping you to have more direct access with your audience, and we've got some really cool Rumble integration to where Rumble videos are playable in the newsfeed as if native to the platform. So it's helping a lot of people, and we've actually having some testing done right now that's actually showing that that people that are posting right now on Pickax their Rumble videos, they're getting significantly higher views on their videos that they're posting directly on our platform, specifically because of the way that we've integrated into it. So it's really cool. A lot of people are joining. We just had the Vigilant Fox join, Children's Health Defense, Daily Cloud, a bunch of amazing people on there. So you guys can definitely check it out.
And where's your website?
Yeah, if you guys just go to pickaxe.com, pickax.com, you guys can sign up for right now. The app is dropping here in a couple of weeks. We're finalizing the app that'll be on iOS and Android, but you guys can follow me over there. That's the best place to find me is on Pickaxe.
Thank you, Jeff. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too.